Welcome to episode 20. We have here, launching on this solid booster, a fairly cheap launch method for the payload that we're carrying, a scan satellite. So I have installed a couple of other mods into this, most notably ScanSat, which will allow us some new science experiments and some new parts to scan the different planets and moons and all the bodies that we visit, which not only will give us some science, not only will allow us to scan and determine all of the different biome distributions and all of that sort of stuff, as well as scanning for resources and other sorts of things on these planets, it gives us a bunch of new contracts and science experiments, which give us, importantly, funds, which are going to be very important getting into higher in the tech tree and as we get more into the interstellar parts, because those are very expensive and we need as much money as we can get our hands on. So this is just a simple visual scan satellite, which will create visual maps of carbon. We have a contract for it, and each one of these contracts is pretty lucrative, honestly, between like 50 and 100,000 funds each. And you can also consolidate the contracts and launch all the different scans onto an individual satellite and get a ton of payout from it. So you can see there's the planetary mapping, going through all the different layouts. And there's a bunch of different layouts that overlays that we can put for all of the different materials here. Most of them are from Interstellar, and they'll be very useful for mining fuels and radioactive elements for our reactors and nuclear parts. But we also have this map, which is the visual scan that we've completed. And it'll complete over a long period of time, which we can cut through here. And as we go, as this thing finishes more and more orbits, it will fill out more and more of this map until we've fulfilled enough for the contract to be considered complete. And we can transmit that data back when that time comes. So orienting the panels for this thing to stay and continue mapping carbon over a long period of time. Now, in this rather larger one, which is also being launched on an SRB, this is another scan satellite that I plan to send to the moon. Now, I have a bunch of different contracts, so this is a much more complex scan satellite. It will scan things like, and we're flipping out of control, of course, because the center of mass and aerodynamic properties change as the fuel burns out, but we get it pointed. So we have some contracts for visual altimetry and also multispectral scanning, and the multispec does biomes and resources. So this will be considerably more ambitious. We also have that stock survey scanner, and I deploy one of the solar panels and I realize it is clipping into the fairing a bit there, so separation may be a little bit tricky with that. So get this thing the rest of the way into orbit, and then we just plot our course over to the moon, which is a simple maneuver that we can execute. We've seen all of this stuff before. And then we can complete the burn. So now each of these scanning parts, it's difficult to kind of cram them all onto one because it's hard to fit a bunch of these parts together like that in a small fairing, but also because they each have their own altitudes and distances from the body at which they work best. And so if you're too close or too far, then it will be less effective. So for these ones, the ones that I have on here, the best is going to be about 250 kilometers above the moon. And we'll burn out the rest of this stage to get into a fairly elliptical orbit, but it should be good enough that it gives us a good range. And we get over there. And now it is time for us to finish our burn. You can see the other mod that I've installed is Better Time Warp, which can give me some more variety in the time ranges I'm able to warp in. And of course the solar panel breaks when we separate and send this thing into a dramatic spin. So as that calms down, we extend the antenna. We can perform the gamma ray experiment, which is from Interstellar, and that gives us some more science and more resource scanning. So we transmit that, and then we can start to deploy all of the other scanning experiments. So resource scan, we can transmit that back. We can perform this radar antenna, as well as all of these other ones that will take some time to complete. And we just have to let this thing sit here for several days as it completes multiple orbits over the moon. Get it oriented in a nice way. And eventually we should be good. So now, of course, we switch the map to the moon. And we just let this thing complete several orbits and gradually fill out more and more of this map. So this is just the visual one, but there's a bunch of different overlays. We can also switch between all of the celestial bodies we've scanned, of which there are only 2, but that will greatly increase in the future. So we can also put resource overlays and biome stuff. There's all sorts of resources. This one seems to be concentrated in those craters. I think this is uraninite. And yeah, we can change the projections as well. And I believe there's a way to export these maps that have been generated once they're all completed. So you just complete a few more orbits. Let this fill out, and you can see that I apparently managed to put this thing in a perfect orbital resonance so that by the time it comes over areas that's already scanned, it is going exactly over the path it has scanned, which is bad if you want to scan the entire thing, because now it's leaving several dark spots. And to fulfill those contracts, we also need to reach 75% fulfillment of scanning the moon, which will take a lot longer. Now for this one, a bit more of a fun launch vehicle design. I've put a bunch of these ullage motors on the side, and then put the central SRB in the middle there. And this is going to be another carbon ScanSat, but with all of the rest of the scanning technologies that I didn't put on the first one. The first one was just visual. This is going to contain all the altimetry, which is those radar ones, the multi-spec, which does biome and resources, and a couple of others that I have forgotten. And these are all for contracts, so we will get a ton of payout by completing these. And so now we just continue this burn on that little stage up there. Deploy the fairings. And yeah, extend the solar panels once we get up to altitude. Let this thing get the rest of the way into orbit. A couple 100 kilometers is what we're going for. And yeah, once we get our apoapsis up, I'm just watching it in the flight engineer window there. 200 kilometers is good. And yeah, now we just warp ahead until we get to that point. Passing over the poles of carbon, of course. And once we reach our apoapsis, we can then perform our circularization burn. Just a quick, a couple 100 meters per second. Ditch that, and now we're flying free. Deploy the radar scanner. And now we can just let this thing sit here, scan all of the altimetry and the biomes and resources that Kerbin has to offer. And yeah, this thing is just going to sit here. We now have 3 scan satellites, and they will be providing a suite of information about these 2 bodies, and we'll launch more to different planets and moons that we explore in the future. So just letting this thing kind of sit here, and yeah, it's passing over gradually more. Now this here is the next step of our technology development. This here is roughly 175,000 funds worth of parts. About 100,000 of those are in this reactor here. So this is the liquid metal cooled reactor. This is the first nuclear reactor that we get from the Interstellar mod. And what it does is it's just gonna sit here. We're gonna put this somewhere off to the side of the Space Center so it doesn't interfere with our launches. And it is going to generate megajoules of power. Now, megajoules are basically convertible between electric charge and units of megajoules. And so you can use those megajoules to do certain things. There's engines that we unlock later on that consume megajoules. You can also beam the power across space. And that's what these large things on the front and back here are. The one on the back is the diode beamed power laser, which it allows us to send megajoules to anywhere within its line of sight. And then we also have this microwave transducer. Now, I'm not entirely sure how the microwave transducer works, so I have to do probably a bit of reading on that. But it will allow us to receive and transmit more megajoules across the solar system. Now, because this is a nuclear reactor, I do have these giant radiators on the front and back, as well as these wraparound radiators that are doing some more direct cooling. These two, the transmitters and transducers, will also generate their own waste heat, which will be something that I have to manage. And on the side here, we've got the giant solar panels that will help us to keep electric charge, keep the thing up and running. And we're going to park this somewhere on the other side of the Space Center here, possibly along with the large antennas at the tracking station. And that way, it'll be far enough away that it won't get in the way of us launching or landing any planes or rockets. But it'll be close enough that if something happens to it, we can easily service it, we can refuel it, do all of those things. And this will be the first part of our beamed power network. This transducer is the same one that I was planning to launch up to the Skylab, and then I never got around to actually doing that, so I'll have to do that in the future. But yeah, we're just going to drive this over to the tracking station. And we put this thing into 4x speed. I could push this a lot further. You can see I'm barely putting any throttle into that jet engine. But this thing is very big, very top heavy and expensive, and I really don't want to risk it crashing. I also may have to move it further from the Space Center because it is pretty large and complex, and when we're launching other things within 2.5 kilometers, it may cause us to have some, the game physics calculations would slow down. But we are arriving at its final parking destination. And over the ledge. And we're just going to park this somewhere alongside these antennas here. Maybe in this empty spot right here seems pretty good. So we're going to get it over there. And then once it's in here, I'm going to line it up to the east-west, so that way we can orient our solar panels in the best way possible. And then we can actually deploy all of the systems on here. So getting ourselves lined up. There we go. We can now shut down the engine here. And extend those. And then we can retract. Whoa. Okay, come on. Flip it back over. Getting some clouds in front of the sun. Okay, maybe let's let it kind of fall over. And there we go. Nope, why are the wheels extending? Oh, man. Okay. I think that should be good. I guess I configured my action groups wrong. But this should be good enough. We're a little off, but that's fine, I think. So now, activate receiver, and we can extend all of these. And these are just going to keep everything, all the batteries and all the power charged, so that way we don't run out of electricity on here, because that would be very unfortunate when you have something like a nuclear reactor. So now, of course, we can wait a little for the sun to come higher. Get some better lighting in here. And now we can extend the panel. So I believe this is a mix between a receiver and a transmitter. So it can generate its own power as well as send it across places, and it can receive power that is transmitted, but I don't believe it can do both at the same time. Although I will probably have to read the documentation to actually figure out exactly how this thing works. So now those are pointing themselves towards the sun, getting even more sun exposure. And now we can activate transmitter. And you can see the megajoules draining out of the system. And then they come back online. The reactor is active. So what we can now do, or what we now have to do, is extend these other radiators. And that way we can manage all of the thermal load that's going to be generated from here. And so this, now that it is fully deployed, is a pretty large structure. It rivals some of the buildings on the Space Center facility here. But this is just going to sit here, be a ground-based method of power generation for us. And that will be the basis of our beamed power network, and we'll build off of this in the future and have some more uses for this technology. We'll see it more in the future episodes. All right, back with this shuttle design here. And mostly what I've done is added just a few fins to the launch vehicle portion there. So some large fins on the sides of the boosters as well as the fuel tank. And what that should do is give us a little bit more aerodynamic stability on launch, and that way we shouldn't immediately flip out and go into a flat spin. So with this, we're going to try to rendezvous with the space station. Because they are in need of some life support. So we're going to set it as our target, and in the meantime declutter all of our other systems in here. And now line ourselves up with the equator, using the moon as this trick. And we're just going to warp then until the Space Center is exactly underneath the orbit of the space station, which should be momentarily. And now, in just a bit, we're just going to keep going a little bit more until we are just underneath the yellow line. And there. So we're going to have to go into a pretty low orbit to catch up with the station. We also have to launch slightly northward, so I'm going to keep that in mind. And I'm also going to control from here. So, without any further delays, let us launch. So those two SRBs are going to do most of the initial lifting. Once they burn out, then we will be flying purely on the liquid engines. And if you remember, these solids is what made us kind of flip out of control last time. And I think it's because we were low enough that the center of mass change was having a pretty big effect on our aerodynamics. So now, once we get going straight up enough, we should be enough of the way out of the atmosphere that it shouldn't be too much of a problem if I just fly a more vertical flight path. It does seem to also have a tendency to want to pitch forwards or to the west, which is something I want to avoid. I also don't want to go too far away from the vector here, because then I would risk spinning out of control. So just fighting the thing's tendency and gradually bringing our nose eastward. You can see we've drifted a good bit west, actually, over the launch pad, but now we should be fast enough and going in a good enough direction that it starts to take more of the path that we want. Now, of course, this is not accurate to how the actual space shuttle flew its launches, because that was propelled by the solid boosters and also the engines on the actual orbiter itself, whereas here we are just using the solid boosters to get a good kick off of the pad. And then we have some boosters on the orbiter as well as on the fuel tank itself. And this will give us lots of capability. We end up in orbit with basically, or we should end up in orbit with a basically full tank of fuel on the orbiter, which should give us a lot of delta V with that Poodle engine there. And I am just going to check my trajectory. We are actually going pretty steep, so I'm going to start being a little bit more aggressive, although I think we can honestly risk flipping out at this point. Though it's still not something I want to, avoid. But I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with my flight path. So now just pitching back, rolling into the orientation that I want to take. And I've gotten this one here, I've got that menu up because as we burn through the fuel on that tank, our center of mass is going to be changing a lot. So that will impart a torque onto the vessel. And then we will have to change the throttle controls on this engine to change our thrust vector as well. That way we should keep the whole thing stable. So now I really want to start pitching back because we are going rather more steeply than I would like to. And we're getting close to burnout on the SRBs. 50 seconds to apoapsis. We're looking pretty good there, at least. Another 150-ish meters per second in these boosters before they go. It'll be soon. They are starting to get some heating. And we're drifting a little off vector. So keep it pointed. And burn out. And now hopefully... Ooh. I think we're good, actually. I think we're just fine. So now, we should just be able to fly this thing the rest of the way into orbit. We're barely managing over a G of acceleration, but we are pretty high in the atmosphere, and these are very efficient engines. So as we pitch on backwards, we should start to see more and more performance coming out of them. And in fact, I'm starting to see the thing does want to start pitching down a little, so I'm going to back off the thrust on this one just a touch. Or actually, that was not the right thing to do. In fact, I think I need to back it off of here. Yeah, that way we can keep it stable, we can keep it pointed. And I am going pretty far northwards, so I'm going to start burning a little bit more towards the east here. Keeping about a minute to apoapsis, which is good. We have, if you can see, we've got a ton of delta V in this stage, so now it's just a question of will we actually be able to make it into orbit? And we're a good way out of the atmosphere as well. So it's mostly a question of just building horizontal speed at this point, which is going to be slow. We're not managing much more than a G of thrust, but we're going to point sideways enough that it should help us out. And yeah, we are definitely going into a much more inclined trajectory than I would like, and we're losing it just a bit. Come on. Get it under control. Okay. This thing really wants to fly like this. So I'm going to let it kind of roll into that orientation. But we will have to see this fly the rest of the way into orbit and rendezvous with the space station in another episode. Until next time.